All right, awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to join the webinar today. My name is Scott Bono. I am the Executive Vice President of Product and Operations here at Carrot, the world's largest interviewing company. And today we are going to be discussing how AI is transforming tech hiring as we know it. And I am joined in this discussion by two esteemed guests who I will introduce in just a moment. But before I introduce them, I want to just go over our agenda for today and a couple of housekeeping items. So we'll plan to take about 45 minutes for the conversation today. We'll start with about 30 minutes of dedicated fireside chat around the topic of AI and its impact on tech hiring. And we want to leave about 15 minutes of time for Q&A at the end. So please feel free to share your questions in the Q&A feature down at the bottom of the Zoom webinar. The webinar today is being recorded, and we will send out a link to the recording tomorrow via email. And lastly, this is the first in a three-part series of webinars. Part two of this discussion will focus on hearing from talent acquisition leaders, and I'll be joined by the leaders from Duolingo, Labelbox, and Tinder for that discussion. Really excited about that as well. We'll be sending out an invitation to that shortly, and I will share a link for that at the end of the webinar today. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our guests. We have Shagnik Nandi, the Chief Development Officer of Okta, and Eddie Zhou, the founding engineer and head of AI at Glean. Welcome, Shagnik and Eddie.
Thanks, Scott. Really excited to be part of this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. Thanks for having us, Scott.
Awesome. Well, let's start out by just level setting for the group. For folks that may not be particularly well versed in this space, what is generative AI and how would you describe it, Shagnik?
So I literally try to do it the way you explain it to a kid, because my two boys, aged 12 and 10, asked me this a few days back. So this is what I told them. I said, Fluffy is a blank. Fluffy just got back from blank, and I asked them to fill it in, and they said, Fluffy is a boy, he just got back from dinner. And then I said, I'm going to give you one more sentence preceding the things I said. I said, Fluffy is panting, now fill those two blanks. And they said, Fluffy is panting, Fluffy is a boy, Fluffy just got back from running. And then I said, I'm going to give you one more sentence preceding that previous sentence. And I said, Fluffy went woof woof, Fluffy is panting, Fluffy is a blank, Fluffy just came from blank, and they said Fluffy is a dog, and Fluffy came back from running. And you can see basically as I add more context, both immediate context and global context, like in this case, the fact that dogs go woof woof has nothing to do with the sentence. It's just like global context the kids have built up. You do a more accurate job generating content. You can say the same thing, not just about like sentences about art. If I ask you to mimic some artist and you know they mostly use squares and circles, you will try to mimic a little better. So at a very simplistic level, obviously oversimplifying, I look at Gen AI as the ability to consume a lot of contextual, immediate, and broader information to generate content more meaningfully, more realistically, more accurately, and learning over time.
Great. And Eddie, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation. I'd tack onto that by sort of illuminating why the generative AI that's been coming out over the past few months is markedly different from language modeling and other AI that's been there, or even older generative models. And that's because the size of these models, the amount of the context that Shagnik referenced, is resulting in systems that can do near human level reasoning, right? And so beyond just generating text, these can form the backbone for agents that can do reasoning level tasks. And that's an exciting new sort of development rather than just generating language, right? And we can think of all these novel applications that are coming from it. So yeah, I think that's a nice lens to view the generative models of today through.
Great, thank you for that. And also, we would like to kick off a poll, which is, are you currently hiring for AI roles in your organization, yes or no? So take a second there when you get a chance and select your answer. And while we are doing that, wanted to also just ask, Eddie, we'll start with you. Before we get into Gen AI and tech hiring specifically, obviously your role at Glean being the head of AI, how is generative AI impacting you and your work today in terms of product development and the like?
Yeah, definitely. I think here at Glean, our vision has always been to, over the past few years, it was to bring a Google-like experience to knowledge workers. And as folks, as consumers sort of harness the power of ChatGPT in their daily lives, it made very clear sense to sort of figure out how we can bring that technology and that experience to knowledge workers everywhere as well. So really for us, generative AI is a way to really add the icing on the cake of understanding and helping knowledge workers find information and do their tasks day in and day out. So it's really, I would say, not altered our product development and vision, but really accelerated how quickly we think we can bring value to everyone who works on a computer.
That's very cool and an exciting mission for sure. Sagnik, how about yourself for your teams at Okta? How has generative AI impacted your work every day?
Yeah, I think AI as a whole and generative AI, obviously, security space is filled with problems that can leverage. We are looking at it from, you can think of 3 buckets. One is existing functionality, many of which was already leveraging AI. How do you further turbocharge them? How do you boost their ability? So there's that bucket, taking existing functionality and making it even better or even more scaled. The second is net new functionality that some of the advancements allow us to do. There's so many companies. For example, you could introduce better search functionality. You could introduce a more natural way of conversing with the product. Again, I'm giving generic examples and not specifically things we are looking at. But you can enhance your product offering using generative AI. And the third bucket is improving your operational efficiency. So internally, like how you route tickets, how you deal with escalation playbooks, etc. A lot of what you do, you can do them better and do them more efficiently, leveraging some of these technologies. So we are looking at it from these 3 buckets, and there are lots of really interesting things happening.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Well, it looks like from our poll, about half of the attendees are currently hiring for Gen AI roles, which is exciting to see. And so, Eddie, for you, at a high level, how are you and your teams thinking about incorporating generative AI into how you think about tech hiring? What are some things that you've seen work? And are there things that you've used in your hiring processes historically that you think you're going to have to adapt or change as a result of generative AI coming on the scene?
Yeah, great question. So, I think first when ChatGPT started to gain mainstream sort of visibility and other coding assistant interfaces and technologies were more and more widespread, there was some concern for us. During an interview process, we have coding interviews that are not just whiteboard interviews, but we have, say, an assignment interview, right, where someone is given a multi-hour task and told to go complete this assignment. And the previous process before was, the interviewer would have some check-ins here and there and sort of see how the candidate was progressing. And so when ChatGPT gained popularity, there was concern that folks could just leverage ChatGPT and sort of blast through this process. And so there's a lot of internal debate about what we should do and what we shouldn't do. And ultimately, we came to the conclusion that we would discourage the use of it during the interview process, while acknowledging that in their real jobs, right, in their sort of day-to-day software engineering, a lot of code assistant tools can be very useful, right? Plenty of our engineers use GitHub Copilot, and it accelerates their sort of development process, right? So how do we sort of communicate to our interviewees and our candidates that, hey, what we're testing for is not that, is sort of the core skill set under the hood. And that's why we'd like to refrain from you leveraging these technologies during the process, but we're totally supportive of you kind of leveraging them during your day-to-day job. And so, we did have to adjust a little bit of our expectations around that coding assignment. We tried to have interviewers sort of check in more frequently. And I'll say, at the end of the day, making sure that policy was adhered to is not actually as difficult as it sounds. It's not, oh, you need to really monitor whether an interviewee is sort of adhering to it, because the reality is during discussion, if you're probing at how they're solving these problems at any sort of depth, it'll become very clear sort of if they truly understand the solution to their problem. And I think it's a similar sort of analog to when any software engineering interviewer knows how to sort of tell if a candidate has already seen the problem before, and if they're sort of reciting the answer, and any experienced interviewer can sort of modulate the problem a little bit to really get at if they truly developed the solution on their own or truly understood the problem solving behind it. So I'd like to make that analog to sort of the concerns around using coding assistance during the process. But I think we've been able to sort of acknowledge it and continue interviewing and hiring at a good pace.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of the things that we've certainly observed and I've seen is that even the first iteration of ChatGPT that launched late last year was astonishingly good at taking an English language description of a problem and turning that into code. If what you were really asking somebody to do was basically translate from English to Python or JavaScript or C, ChatGPT was really, really good at that. And it strikes me that the interview content and the kinds of challenges that you're putting in front of candidates is going to have to adapt. If you are taking sort of more of a, hey, can I see if you can take this word problem and translate it into code type of thing, that there are going to be systems that do that extremely well. And so that's maybe a sign that if that's what you're seeing in your process right now, focusing a little bit more on problems that are really about, logical and critical thinking, that you then generate a solution, and then that solution gets translated into code, are going to become, I think, more critical in the process. Sean, kicking it over to you, how has generative AI impacted your existing teams and their work? Are your teams beginning to integrate tools like ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot into their day-to-day workflow?
Yeah, a bunch of things. So we are, starting off pilots, leveraging many of these tools like Copilot. I think it's very interesting and exciting. So that we are also trying to leverage tools around just information finding, like getting people bootstrapped when they join the company, or even as they're developing on a day-to-day basis, is challenging. So if there are better ways of just making a lot of contextual information that, hey, for this kind of like code, these are the design documents, or these are the things that are relevant, or if you're trying to do this task, this is the kind of stuff you should look into. These are relevant tickets, these are relevant customer issues. There are interesting things around that. We are also, are there more automation that can happen for data? I mentioned operational efficiency. So think about a lot of escalation playbooks. You can probably start generating very interesting set of steps to make like day-to-day actions easily debug through some of those things. So we are exploring a bunch of these things. But I do think it's very important to embrace this technology, because it'll really help us move to a new world, which will probably become the new normal.
Yeah, and Eddie, I wonder, have you seen your teams become more efficient and effective as they have adopted these tools? Like, what's been the practical outcome of integrating AI into workflow for your teams?
Yeah, it's interesting because the team I manage directly are folks who are developing generative AI and generative AI applications, and so also thinking about how they use it in their day-to-day. We obviously use our own product. We use Glean. We use the generative components of Glean. In right now, Glean doesn't necessarily strictly do code completions like GitHub Copilot, but a fair amount of engineers, both in my team and across other engineering teams, are using Copilot and finding that for some space of engineering tasks, that these are big accelerants, right? If you're doing something that's I don't want to say rote, but a little bit more templated, batch, it can be really helpful. And I think the things that require a little bit more sort of thoughtfulness and design, it's sort of that framing people have described before, where you can work with a draft, right? If you can get a draft from a lot of the generative technology, but you apply a critical eye to that draft, you can get a big accelerant in how quickly you can build out a project, write a piece of code, get some code landed. So I think practically, yes, we are seeing accelerants from embracing this technology.
Very cool. I'd like to transition now into a little bit about how generative AI may impact who we are hiring and sort of how we're hiring. We've got another poll question here, which is, do you think AI hiring is different from traditional software engineering hiring in some way? Yes or no? And Eddie, I'd love to start with you. What's your approach to hiring for AI talent? Are you looking for the same types of things? Or does your process look similar or dissimilar to your sort of traditional general, sort of suite generalists? How does that look like for you?
Yeah. So for us, all of our ML engineers are all software engineers in title. Everyone goes through the same, is held to the same software engineering bar on my team as they are for other teams. And additionally, we have a bunch of AI specific interviews, including ML systems design or sort of ML foundations. And so for us, there's really there's a different an additive sort of skill set, but that's mainly because we focus on hiring sort of horizontal ML engineers who are capable of building both the models and the systems that incorporate those models. Different teams might have slightly different approaches. They might hire sort of modeling specialists who are more research focused and pair them with more software engineers. But throughout my career, I found this sort of horizontal persona to be a lot more flexible and in general productive at sort of going in and getting whatever is needed to ship intelligence into your product end to end. That's the sort of persona we've gone for. And so from a hiring perspective, I think in many ways it is very similar to the software engineering sort of typical hiring loop, with an additional set of sort of evaluation that generally for us involves a little bit more statistical mathematical foundations, rather than sort of just on the problem solving and the algorithm side.
Very interesting. And Shagnik, for you, in terms of the technical bar and sort of the level of scrutiny or the level of, sort of how optimistic or more are you more optimistic or more pessimistic when you're hiring these folks? Are you willing to take some risks here, or are you really looking to make sure that you've got someone who is the right candidate? How does that maybe differ, if at all, from how you approach, traditional engineering hiring?
Yeah, we have, like, similar to what Eddie mentioned, we have two buckets. We have people who are really specialists and experts, and those I think are very different interviews because you're going in a lot deeper. But we are also hiring, I think of them as AI aware generalists, like people who do classic product development but inject intelligence and more machine learning into the overall product development process. And for that group, I think we are increasingly trying to understand whether they really can deliver what they are claiming to, because AI, because of all the excitement around it, almost every resume, like anyone and everyone has, and not necessarily like lying in any way, but everyone claims to have some form of AI experience. So filtering out, like, how relevant is that experience for what we do, and like how real is it? Is it like, a small project they did, but they by and large like don't deal with it, or have they handled, like, AI can be a little more of an art. So, something like programming, very easy to get the feedback. Will this code work? Here, understanding, like, have you grappled with like a difficult, feature extraction problem? Have you grappled with like something where you thought you did everything right, and then the outcome was very different? And how did you then go through that process? What was that journey like? Adding flavors of that, so you can really tease out, like, at what depth do they understand, at what depth have they worked, and how will they fit into existing problems, existing tool chains, etc. So that's something we additionally injecting into the process.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of that. Scott, do you mind if I jump in?
No, please go right ahead. Yep.
Mainly because I think there's been a lot of chatter, obviously, over the past few months around titles like prompt engineer and whether or not traditional, I say traditional in the past 5 to 10 years, ML and NLP roles which required experience either in the industry or as a researcher. There's definitely been, it's more accessible to more people because building prompts and interfacing with these large language models can solve for a lot of different cases that previously required a lot of specialization, a lot of expertise, right? Right now, my stance on that is I find that folks with that foundation, with that ML foundation, still actually make the most effective prompt engineers themselves, right? And so even if a given ML application calls for the LLM as the right solution, those folks are still the right people to both make that call and implement the solution, because oftentimes the solution might not require an LLM and it might require something else. And You want the people who really have that actual expertise and ML foundations in the chair making those calls. So I think that's maybe a somewhat controversial take, as certainly other folks have proposed that, oh, you just need to know how to engineer prompts and then you can be an ML engineer. And I don't want to sound gatekeeper, but I think there's definitely some nuance to it, and a lot of traditional ML experience comes into play there.
It's a really interesting question. I think like the question at the end of the day, I think, is going to come down to scale, right? Like there is a very small group of people in the market right now who has significant practical experience doing that type of work. Those people are absolutely out there, but they are extremely well sought after, and they have their sort of pick of the litter in terms of opportunities. One of the things that jumps to mind for me in terms of an analog is we've seen, some of the more recent revolutions in computing, most notably mobile comes to mind for me when we were in the sort of late, 2000s and early 2010s, when it became very clear that it didn't matter what business you were in from a technology standpoint, you were going to have a strategy and approach to mobile. But there was this tiny cadre of folks that had significant experience developing for mobile, whether it was flat out developing on the phones or developing with mobile considerations in mind, like occasional connectivity and smaller form factors, less compute on device, that kind of thing. You saw a number of organizations during that period of time take a sort of a hybrid approach where, yeah, they tried to hire those people that had that specific background, but they also took an approach of, we're just going to hire a bunch of generalists who have strong ability to learn on the job, and we're going to pair them with the people who know what they're doing. I'm curious for both of you, are you looking at approaches like that where you're trying to find people who are going to be able to learn on the job and sort of building your teams in that sort of hybrid way? Or is that a viable approach, in the dawn of the age of AI?
I think being deliberate is important, like being very proactive about what is it exactly that I expect, as opposed to one size fits all. So we have projects of different flavor. We have projects where we are working on a very fast turnaround time. And for those, I think people with the knowledge, and to Eddie's point, I also have similar things that I think people who've done it in the past, people who have that level of depth. A friend of mine jokes that if you are aware of the Dunning-Kruger curve, the Dunning-Kruger curve for AI is probably even more steeper, where it's easy to feel like, okay, so overcoming that, you want people who can instantly come in and deliver. There are projects where you might need a very specialized part of machine learning. Like we have like data engineering needs, which are very, very specialized, and like people who've done that at scale. At the same time, there are pockets where we feel that going forward, these product lines areas will be a lot more intelligent, but we have the bandwidth and time to evolve it. And there, I think getting people, obviously having people with adequate experience is always a plus, but also a lot more open to people who are interested in learning, who show that aptitude for being able to adapt, be nimble. So I think being very, we are trying to be very deliberate around, these are the projects, this is the mix of people, this is the amount of specialization, existing expertise, et cetera, we need, and hire that way.
Yeah, and Eddie, how about for you?
Yeah, I think that's being purposeful and deliberate here is a great principle to use. For example, I think across Glean's engineering org, right there, we likely want to hire software engineers, and it's a plus if software engineers are proficient, quick learners, and can sort of be when they're adjacent to ML, adjacent to LLMs, have enough familiarity to really smooth those boundaries out, right? When you're hiring for, a team whose job it is to build that AI, whether it's to train actual models or, figure out how to leverage these LLMs more directly, then you need a more specialized skill set. You want to be more sort of careful about actually hiring folks who can hit the ground running on day one. So I think team to team, it will differ. And obviously sort of depending on how much core AI technology factors into the company level priorities, the company level vision, folks will want to make a different decision about sort of priority of hiring talent at that level. And I'd say, even within ML, within like this very small subset of folks who have enough proficiency, there's still sort of tiers of granularity in a way, right? You might have someone who has worked in NLP for a decade, and has a lot of industry experience, applications across many different layers. but has never actually personally trained a large language model, right? And that person is going to be highly effective, but you might even actually want someone very specifically who is intimately familiar with the process behind, the mechanics behind training these large language models. And I think someone said recently that there's a few hundred such people out there in the world right now. And so even zooming out from that, there's different ways you can be deliberate about exactly what skill set you want and what your team needs in this moment and in the next few months, in the next few years.
Very cool. Thank you for that. We are coming up on the last couple of questions we have for the fireside chat. I just want to put a plug for folks to enter any questions that you might have that you would like to hear Sagnik and Eddie answer into the Q&A function below. And with that, Sagnik, I want to turn this one to you. When you think about recruiting and sort of even the future of work, how do you see AI and humans, coexisting and working together?
I think recruiting is something I feel is really ready for both disruption and a lot of innovation. In general, I think recruiting has a very, very strong impact on who joins your organization, both in terms of talent, but also in terms of their ability to get going from the beginning, etc. If you look at AI, traditionally, it's very good at some sets of problems, amongst many others. It's very good at scaling an existing solution to a large number of, it's really good at scaling systems. It's really good at taking things which have a lot of common patterns and repeating it better, automating it. And it's also really good at personalizing things. I think all these three aspects can be leveraged very heavily in recruiting. So if you look at a lot of organizations, half of the people are probably not even participating in the interview process, probably more than half. Of the folks participating, a large number of them are potentially doing it reluctantly and don't end up providing the right candidate experience, be it in terms of when things get scheduled, how those interviews go about, are they really testing the candidate in an iterative fashion where they go, as opposed to a fixed set of questions they go with. And then you have a handful of people who really do it well. They often end up being overburdened because they are doing a vast majority. All these are problems that I think AI and automation and innovation can really address. So you can do a lot more interviews at scale. So, geographically spread out interviews at different time zones. You don't have to necessarily leverage the people in your team. You can scale things out. You can automate a lot of this. Coding interviews, as we discussed, a lot of this is easily scaled. You can remove biases in the interview process, which is actually very damaging. A lot of studies have shown that that can make or break the candidate experience. You can eliminate a lot of those things. So I think this is a pocket, obviously I'm passionate about this, but I think this is an area really, really ready for a lot of innovation, disruption, both from AI, but in general. And I think AI will really speed a lot of that up.
Very cool. All right, one last question before we dip into audience Q&A. I'm going to ask both of you to break out your crystal balls and peer into the future for me. Where do you see the future of engineering hiring headed in this new world where sort of the early days of AI are upon us? And Eddie, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I hate making predictions because I get recorded and look dumb. I think, honestly, I'm going to have to bail out on this one because I really do think with the pace of development, different people think, oh, generative AI has either hit a plateau in the past few months, and then the next 2 weeks, someone says, actually, no, we've broken through that plateau. But things are moving very, very fast. And I think we have to sort of be ready to reevaluate our stances on a monthly basis now, rather than, yearly or quarterly, reevaluating what our how we should be doing hiring, what kind of people we should be hiring. So I think the future involves more dynamic views into hiring. And I think that similar to what Sagnik said, there's plenty of opportunities for accelerants for AI to actually make hiring a better process. But I think there's also some ways that we could stumble into using it in the wrong way, using it to actually resulting in sort of our candidate funnels being not appropriately broad, deferring too much to machine judgment rather than human judgment. So, I'm both optimistic and a little bit cautious about the coming months.
Great. And Shagnik, we'll let you close it out.
I fully agree with everything Eddie said. I can almost like repeat that. I do feel just to add to that, two interesting things will happen. I do feel the next many months, maybe years, will have a lot more AI focused efforts. And what they will be, what technology they'll leverage, I think, as Eddie said, will probably change vastly every few quarters. But I think as an area that'll happen. So in general, candidates with that expertise, with that focus, you'll probably see a lot more of it, both in terms of candidate pool as well as like need from organizations. So I think that'll be an interesting mix shift potentially for many organizations. The second thing is I think the overall interview pipeline will get optimized a lot more. Like you can probably get a bunch of things better automated, create better processes, tools around that, especially some of the upper funnel stuff. And then you can probably also, as a result of that, as you manage to scale those things out, focus very differently on like close to closing that part of the funnel, et cetera. So I think you'll see more variation in the funnel with a lot more tooling, et cetera, coming in filtering to the right candidate pool in a better way, providing better candidate experience, like shrinking the overall end-to-end candidate turnaround time, et cetera. So I think a lot of interesting things will happen around that, leveraging many of these tools, et cetera.
Outstanding. Awesome. All right. Well, we have covered a lot of ground and we want to make sure to give our audience a chance to ask a few questions. And I see there's a number of questions in the chat. So let's dive in right there. The first one is from Taj, which is, how is Carrot using generative AI? I can touch on this just briefly. At a very high level, we are sort of looking at the generative AI world on sort of three horizons. And horizon 0, I would call it, is what's here right now and how does that impact our business? So Carrot is in the business of unlocking opportunity for candidates by providing interview and assessment experiences that are fair, predictive, and enjoyable. And a key part of that for us in the near term is making sure that the content and our assessments are resilient against, being trivially solved by generative AI. So we have gone through a process of auditing all of our content, putting our interviews through, for example, ChatGPT, and understanding where it does well and where it doesn't, and then developing content that is designed, as we talked about a little bit earlier, Eddie and I think both touched on, building out content that is designed to really get at problem-solving skills and not just translate this from English into Java, for example. So that's sort of Horizon 0. Horizon 1 is really what skills are employers looking for that are going to be most prevalent and important in this world of generative AI. And there's a couple of things there. I mean, one is we are going to see, I think, people leveraging tools like GitHub Copilot or ChatGPT or other LLM type solutions as a part of their everyday work in the same way that they leverage Stack Overflow and Google and other things like that right now. So a natural extension for us is to include an integration with an LLM into our product so we can actually capture, if the candidate uses an LLM, what was the prompt they gave? What was the output that the LLM generated? How did that candidate turn around and adapt that into the solution? There's also, just making sure that we have content and assessments available to hire for the types of roles that are being hired into these worlds. So your machine learning engineers, your data scientists, your data engineers, those types of things. So we're focusing on that as well. And then Horizon 2 is a little bit more of the forward-looking world, which is sort of anchored by the question, hey, what is the job of a software engineer going to be 2 years, 5 years, 8, 10 years from now? What are things that software engineers are currently spending time on that they are unlikely to be spending time on in the future? And what things are they currently spending less time on that they are going to be spending more time on in the future? So for example, I think it's fair to say that a lot of software engineering in the future is going to be, the way I like to describe it is kind of the metaphor of less about being like a copywriter and more about being an editor. So you are going to be consuming code that's generated by these systems, and it's going to have bits and pieces of what you need, but it's going to be your job to turn that into a coherent deliverable. You're going to have to take into account things like performance, usability, privacy, security, accessibility, those various things. And you're going to have to be able to consume a lot more code, make changes, make sure that it integrates well with all of these various different components. And so we're looking to the future like, hey, what are those skills going to look like, and how can we get ahead of helping clients assess for those types of skills? So in a nutshell, those are kind of the main ways that we are looking at that right now. But Taj, thank you for your question. The next one is, longer term, do you think AI will reduce the number of software engineering jobs on the market or increase the number of software engineering jobs? Seems like some entry-level jobs will be obsolete and AI can easily do, but there will be other new ones created. Sagnik or Eddie, I'm really curious to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I get this question once a week from someone, both socially and professionally. I might be an optimist here, but I very, very strongly believe if you look at the history of innovation and technology, technology has made rapid, fast advancements, but there's always been more problems to solve and more opportunities. So often when technology advances, yes, it can do a whole bunch of things better, but it also opens up a whole bunch of net new things that can be done. So in a world where there are always more opportunities than technology, I think we'll always need more people. Now, what these people need to do can be vastly different. And you see that in any time window, like you can look at it over 50, 60 years. Like my dad was a mechanical engineer, and back then, like that was the thing. Over the years, computers came, and like you see a lot more computer engineers now. There are also lots of mechanical engineers, but that's because a lot of, like, as the advancement in computer science happened, a lot more problems that could be attacked through that opened up. And like now probably a larger number of people are doing computer engineering or computer science related stuff. So I think what people do will change. You'll probably see a lot of like current work will get automated, etc. But that doesn't mean the people, the need for people, the need for good talent will, I think that'll always increase, because the number of opportunities and the number of things that can be done with this technology will only grow. But you'll need people who can leverage the advancement in technology. So that's how at a high level, I think we'll always need more people. I think this is great for overall industry and the world, if I may say so. But I think the mix of who does what will always change, and it has, and people adapt.
Yeah. Eddie, do you have thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I really echo what Sagnik said. I think the second part of this question is sort of amusing around entry-level SWE and what could AI do. And I think that the sort of open question there is, even if you have a system that can, at face value, accomplish a lot of, say, what a very junior SWE might do, the reasons for hiring a junior SWE are to grow them into someone who's more senior and capable of doing things that, frankly, those the systems can't do today, right? And so if you take that foundation away from people as they grow in their career, what happens, right? What happens when someone doesn't exercise certain skills to help them grow and form the technical foundation for more and more complex technical decision making, designing rather than implementation? And so I think that's the open question on my mind is how do we sort of still enable people to grow in the right way in their software engineering careers, while acknowledging that maybe at face value, some of the mechanical work can be automated or not fully automated, but at least accelerated a lot. That's something I think that gets lost out of the narrative, is the reality that, senior engineers, all senior software engineers used to be junior in some way, and they needed to grow into that in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll just add one very short additional perspective, which is when I look at the major computing revolutions that have happened over my professional career over the course of the last 25 years or so, each one of them, whether it was, the internet boom of the late 90s, the shift to mobile in the late 2000s, the advent of cloud, what all of those things have done for me at a meta level is shorten the gap between somebody having a good idea and being able to make that a reality, right? And if you think about the kinds of problems that software and compute are being used to solve today, compared to what they were 20 years ago. All of them are tied to being able to shorten that gap between an idea and and where we are right now, right? Like somebody one day said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I could refill my prescriptions online? Somebody said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I never had to fill up gas in my car again? And so now I'm in a world where I had to do an over-the-air install of a new update of my phone, or of my car last night, which is not a thing that would have made sense 10 years ago. And I think we're going to see the same thing with AI. It's going to further shorten that gap between somebody having a good idea and bringing a new idea to reality. It just means there's going to be those many more interesting types of problems that we can bring this technology to bear on. So thanks for that question. Looking at the time, we are about 2 minutes away. So I'm going to take one more question here from Kent, which is, how do you balance the potential that AI brings to recruiting with concerns around things like candidate privacy, candidate experience, protecting company IP, etc. Eddie or Sagnik, happy to turn this one to you.
Yeah, I could jump in here. I think it really, it really depends on. I think all these applications of generative AI, hiring included, need to be very conscious about the data footprint, right? Where is your data going when you're sending it to an API? What are the presumptions on it? And everyone who hosts such large language models and provides those APIs knows this is top of mind, right? It's going to stop many use cases from coming to fruition. So I have confidence that the ecosystem as a whole is getting closer. For example, a few months ago, OpenAI changed their sort of default API agreements from saying, hey, we will use your data for training, to, hey, by default, we won't unless you opt into it, right? And so this kind of attitude shift is better for everyone overall, and I see more and more of that happening. So that, I think, will allow pairing both the technology here with the safety that should be granted to all the kind of data going in and out.
Sagnik?
Yeah, I think already the technology providers realize these are big problems. So as Eddie mentioned, they are iterating and making changes. I also feel this is a space where being thoughtful, being mindful, taking a more careful stance to start with, and then iterating and being very nimble, because you'll get a bunch of things wrong. So being on the conservative side as you develop, and then being able to quickly iterate and incorporate feedback, that'll be very important. I do feel that there will be things people will learn, but as long as they can quickly incorporate, like, we will get to a better state. I just, again, being mindful will make that more, I think, a reasonable process, and also avoid like big missteps. So.
Yeah, and the one thing that I would add on to that is, I think this is also an area where we can expect to see an increasing amount of legislation. We've already seen, like, New York with its AEDT law, California with CCPA in the States, and obviously in the EU, for example, with GDPR, which I expect will probably be expanded to include stuff in this space. So we already see that this is top of mind with many of our clients as they look at integrating tools that may have AI involved with them in their hiring processes. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. I want to thank our speakers, Sagnik and Eddie. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was a really great conversation. And I want to say a special thanks to everybody in the audience. Please don't forget that we have part 2 and part 3 of this webinar series coming up. Before you go, don't forget to sign up for part 2, which is taking place in September, where I'll be hosting a conversation again, this time with talent acquisition leaders from Duolingo, Labelbox, and Tinder. Looking forward to seeing you all again. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Bye.